here, yeah.
Fantastic. So do you want to?
So we'll have them go right into their opening, and then you'll come back and kick things off.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic.
So when they're finished with the prayer, do you want them to move off to the side or?
Please do. Good morning, all. I'd invite you to please take your seats. It's always a troubling sign when we're 10 minutes behind and we haven't even started yet. It gives us a portent for the rest of the morning, I'm sure, because it's got such a large group today and such an important topic. I want to introduce this morning for our opening prayer a group of wonderful children from the organization Nuestros Pequeños Hermanos, NPH, our little brothers and sisters. This is a home in El Salvador that they're from. There's about 300 children being raised there. This organization raises over 3,000 children in 9 different countries. Started 60 years ago by an American priest in Mexico City. And since then they've raised over 18,000 abandoned and orphaned children, giving them a beautiful home. I visited the El Salvador home about a year and a half ago, and so I got to meet some of these young people and see the beautiful home that they have, and I would invite you to come and see their information. They have a table set up during the break as well, okay, and you can have a chance to interact with the kids. So they're going to lead us in an opening prayer song, and many of you probably know this song, especially those who have lived a Cursillo. So, has anyone lived a Cursillo in this room? De Colores. De Colores. And so I'll ask them to open for us this wonderful day.
Colores son los pajarillos.
you very much. Children have been visiting several parishes in Boston the last week and a half. They're here for another week, and they usually come up every year, children from one or more of the different homes. So please take a chance to say hello to them.
Thank you, Deacon Dan. Welcome, everyone, to our 6th annual Archdiocesan Justice Convocation. Wonderful to welcome many of you back. My name is Pat Deneen, and I'm the chairperson for the APC Social Justice Committee. And I'm privileged to work with a great committee of 12 people from all across the Archdiocese to put together this convocation every year. And in particular, I want to ask several people to take special credit for today. Sister Marianne Batho has just been extraordinary. We thank you so much. And Marianne McLaughlin and Ann Cusson from the Office of Spiritual Life. Ann is standing in the background. This convocation would not be possible without you, Ann. Thank you so much, year after year. And Deacon Dan and his lovely introduction with the children from El Salvador. Many other people can't possibly thank enough of you for all coming and showing up. And what's happened year after year is we have built such a vibrant community now of social justice. You're the ambassadors. You're here today to take what you learn forth and put it into action. This is really serious, and of course we've got a great Pope Francis, our leader now, who's inspiring us every day, and you'll hear more about that in a minute from Father Hare. So largely in response to the evaluations that you fill out year after year, we've continued to change the format, and this year we've allowed more time. We only have 2 panels, so time to go into depth, ask questions, really try to understand much more seriously what's being said so you can put it into action. And then just to remind you, the theme for this year, social justice, a pastoral priority for the new evangelization. And as all of us prepare for the rollout of the collaboratives, Disciples in Mission, let us not forget to incorporate social justice into those pastoral plans. And you're going to hear more about that on our first panel. So, without any further delay, I want to introduce our keynote speaker for today. Every year for the last 6 years, Father Brian Hare. And it's with great admiration and respect that I introduce him every year. But this year I'm going to keep it really short, because I want to hear from you, Father, here. So, and I'm going to quote from Father James Martin. Many of you know, the Jesuit priest, author, editor of the Jesuit magazine America. And this is what he says about Father Hare. The Reverend J. Brian Hare of Harvard University is one of the Catholic Church's greatest assets in this country, and one of the leading experts on Catholic social teaching in the world. That's why many of us are here today, to hear him. He's a professor at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, priest at St. John's Parish in Wellesley, cabinet secretary for social services here at the Archdiocese, overseeing Catholic charities, pro-life office, the housing office, residential care, health care, labor guild. And I'm not going to go on, Father, here because I want to hear what you have to say. Please join us in welcoming Father Hare.
Thank you, Pat. I think the first thing I ought to say is my mother would have really appreciated James Martin, but you shouldn't take it too seriously. So I am delighted to be here the 6th time. It is an honor and privilege. And I simply want to begin by reinforcing all the thank yous that Pat Deneen has offered. And then specifically to say a word about Pat Deneen. Pat Deneen and social justice is like a force of nature at work. It isn't just human. It goes beyond that. The power of the commitment this woman has, working with the committees, the various people she's thanked. And then inside our building, the Disciples in Mission program, the Office of Evangelization and Faith Formation, increasingly we try to do these things together. And therefore, what Pat has led through her committee and her associates sets a whole direction for us inside the Archdiocesan offices committed to disciples in mission, the work of evangelization, and the ongoing teaching ministry of the church. So I just want to second the thanks, but to emphasize Pat's role. Now, when you come to a social justice convocation, I think by instinct, we think we're going to hear about the social teaching of the church. That's a reasonable expectation, and we've tried to do that over the years. But today, we're asked to speak about social justice and evangelization. And I want to submit that the key term that ties social justice to evangelization is the term the church. So social justice, the church, and evangelization, I submit, is the way to think about this relationship. That is to say, when we try to look at how social justice is joined to evangelization, it drives us to think about the nature of the church, the ministry of the church, the understanding of what the church's life is about. So if you try to think about social justice, the church, and evangelization, I submit we have two wonderful guides to help us in this process. The first comes from the Second Vatican Council, the last document of the Second Vatican Council, the document called The Church in the World. And then secondly, more proximately, Pope Francis and his document, The Joy of the Gospel. So if you take the document from Vatican II, which was called Gaudium et Spes, and then take Francis's letter, which is called Evangelii Gaudium, it is interesting to take these two documents together to think about social justice, the church, and evangelization. So let me say a word about evangelization and move to these two documents. There are other people in this room who have spent much more time thinking about, talking about, and doing the work of evangelization than I. So I will be brief lest I get in the way of what they already know and can share with you. But essentially, I think evangelization, reduced to a sentence, is the work of sharing the gospel, its truth, its power, its invitation to sharing the gospel with various circles of people. Those circles extend broadly, I think. Evangelization, I take it, is about deepening the faith of all of us who participate in the life of the church. It is, secondly, about renewing and revitalizing the faith for people who were raised in the church and we are not in connection with at this time. And thirdly, evangelization is also about inviting people into the power and vision of the gospel whose lives have never been touched by it. So there are different ways in which this ministry offers us challenges and opportunities. And so when we think about evangelization, once again, I think we're driven back to the question, what kind of faith are we inviting people to be touched by? What kind of faith are we inviting people to live? And what kind of church allows us to cultivate the faith that will evangelize the world? So let's go back for a bit to the Second Vatican Council, to the last document of the Council. Next year, 2015, will be the 50th anniversary of the document Gaudium et Spes, the Church in the Modern World. The document itself was what I often refer to as the surprise of the Council. The Vatican Council was carefully prepared ahead of time by a series of advanced texts, as you might believe that something as complicated as a council would be prepared carefully ahead of time. In all of those texts leading up to the Second Vatican Council, there was no text on the church in the world. There was a document on the church, but not a document on the church in the world. Now, we believe as Catholics that when bishops gather in council, in addition to their own intelligence, their own faith, their own assistance from others, the work of the Holy Spirit moves through the work of a council. And I suggest to you that if you look at what happened at Vatican II, it will deepen your faith that the Holy Spirit does move through a council. Because while there was no plan for this document, The Church in the World, the bishops set out in the first session of the council and discussed two powerfully important issues. One, the liturgy of the church, how we worship, and secondly, a document on the church, what its meaning was, what its internal life was. Now, as that discussion proceeded on the internal life of the church and the worship of the church, essentially there were some bishops that got restless about the way the dialogue was proceeding. And at the end of the first session, several of them stood up and said, basically, everything we've done has been necessary. We must care carefully for our worship. We must understand who we are as a church. But in different ways, several of them said, what we have done is not enough. Because what the world wants to know is something beyond what we have discussed. The world wants to know what the Church of Christ is in a world that is hungry. The world wants to know what the Church of Christ is in a world where human rights are regularly violated. The world wants to know what the Church of Christ has to say about a world that has the capacity in its military arsenals to wipe out human life in the globe as a whole. We have not told them what the Church of Christ has to say about those issues. And so as a result of those interventions, there was a change in the organization of the council. And they began work immediately on a document that would complement the document on the church with a document on the church in the world. It is interesting, I think, to ask what that document did essentially. Because one could have said, well, the church has spoken about these issues. We have the social tradition of the church. We have had a number of letters from the popes to the church about peace and human rights and poverty and hunger and health care. We have spoken about those. And the fact of the matter is, that's true. There was a strong moral tradition of the modern church, modern meaning essentially beginning in the 19th century, that talked explicitly about these issues. The problem was not that we hadn't said anything. The problem was, where did all of this fit in the life of Catholicism? What kind of weight does the social tradition have in the total picture of Catholic faith? That was the unanswered question. And the difficulty with not locating the social tradition centrally in the life of the church, the difficulty of not doing that, is that the social tradition could easily be treated sort of like an extra credit course. If you were interested in that kind of thing, it was all right. But otherwise, you could survive as a Catholic without having to deal with it. So as you go into Vatican II, there is no doubt in the Catholic world that for the church to be the church, it must celebrate the sacraments and preach the Word of God. You come out of Vatican II, I submit, with an expansion of one dimension of the preaching, the social tradition, so that you come out of Vatican II saying, what does it take to be Catholic? And my argument would be, in light of this document on the church in the world, that to be Catholic, you need to be scriptural, sacramental, and social. That the three things together make up the fabric of Catholic teaching. And so Gaudium et Spes, the church in the world, answers the location of the social tradition. It locates the social justice tradition at the heart of the church's life, where it shares space with the sacraments and the preaching of the Scripture. Sometimes when you ride through cities, you find Protestant churches with a sign out front that says, "We preach the full gospel here." And I always think that what those pastors mean is, for all you Christians that have been living on a liquid diet, we're serving filet mignon here, so that you ought to come inside and hear the full gospel. Well, the full gospel, I think, is scriptural, sacramental, and social. So that what the council did was to tie the powerful moral tradition of the church to the essential understanding of the church's ministry. And I submit, in the 50 years since then, one of the post-conciliar tasks of the church has been the integration of these elements of sacramental, scriptural, and social life. The call to evangelization offers us a new opportunity to integrate these dimensions into a coherent understanding of the faith. This has been done in different ways over the past 50 years. The Jesuits, in their General Congregation of 1974, dedicated the congregation to faith and justice. John Paul II and Benedict XVI added powerfully to the moral tradition and tied it to the ecclesial understanding of the church. Now, one of the areas that has been the most difficult to penetrate successfully has been the life of the parish. There are different levels to Catholicism. The Pope can capture the world's attention from the balcony on Sunday at the Angelus or from his chair. There's a national voice of the church in this country and in other countries. But when you get to the parish, which is so central, it has been harder to, in a sense, permeate the parish with this tradition. You will hear from parishes today that have been able to do it. But I simply offer it not as a critique, but essentially as an invitation that the work of doing this integration of scriptural, sacramental, and social at the parish level is the new opportunity, and the call to evangelization simply catalyzes that process. Now that's looking back, but we have right in front of us, of course, a whole new chapter in this story of integrating the social ministry into the larger ministry of the church. And that is in the words and deeds of this Pope, Francis. Last year at this time, we talked a bit about Francis's words and deeds in the social arena, that by his action as well as by what he said, he kept bringing us back to this question of how the Church of Christ is a powerful, humanizing, sanctifying force in the world. Since last year's conference, we now have not only the words and deeds of Francis, we have, in a sense, an extended meditation by the Pope in this document, The Joy of the Gospel. I really do think there is a fruitful opportunity to read these two texts together. The Vatican II text, Gaudium et Spes, and Francis's text, Evangelii Gaudium. Advent would be a great time to read those two texts together, because Advent, as I'll indicate, focuses on the theme that ties them together, and I'll come to that. So now we have a text. The text, interestingly, was published on the Feast of Christ the King. The Feast of Christ the King was established only in the 20th century as a feast that was to call the attention of the church to its responsibility to permeate the life of society. To permeate the life of society once again with the vision and the transforming power of the gospel. Francis, in his letter, says he invites the Christian faithful to embark on a new chapter of evangelization marked by joy. Now, evangelization, as you find it in the letter, has two different dimensions that he ties together nicely. Evangelization is deeply personal, and evangelization is pervasively social. In paragraph 127, in talking about evangelization, he says it has to do with bringing the gospel to the people we meet, whether they be our neighbors or complete strangers. There is an irreducible dimension of bringing evangelization to a person-to-person encounter within the church and beyond the church. Think of those circles. Deepen the faith of those who participate, revitalize the faith of those who are distant, and use the invitation to faith as part of our ministry. But then in paragraph 176, he stresses the pervasively social dimension of evangelization. He's got a wonderful quote. He says, "To evangelize is to make the kingdom of God present in our world." And then he carries it forward. He says the kerygma, the essential preaching of the gospel, the kerygma has a clear social content. At the very heart of the gospel is life in community and engagement with others. Now, how does Francis build on the Second Vatican Council and complement it? So, what I argued so far is that the Second Vatican Council locates social justice at the center of the Church's life. And we have been trying to absorb that message for 50 years. The next step is Francis's letter. He locates the Church in the context of the preaching and ministry of the kingdom of God. So Vatican II says justice is central to the Church. Francis says the Church is central to the preaching and work of the kingdom. This is not a new theme in Catholic thought, because Catholic thought, in a sense, keeps going back to its source and developing themes and applying them in new circumstances. But this theme of the kingdom, of course, is so visible in the Gospels. In the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus talks constantly about the kingdom of God. He has been sent to preach it. He has been sent to share it. The miracles of the gospel, the healing of the sick, the feeding of the hungry, these are regarded as signs of the kingdom. And as I said, in the liturgy of the Church, we devote the 4 weeks of Advent to thinking about how we're doing on the work of the kingdom. How pervasively is the world permeated by the power and vision of the kingdom? Because the kingdom, if you try to describe it, requires us to remember that many people were mistaken about it. When Jesus talked about the fact that he had come to preach and carry the kingdom, the immediate instinct was he had come to be a political leader. We remember that both the Romans and the Jewish community had this pervasive suspicion they had a political radical on their hands. And even Jesus' closest disciples managed to trip up a bit. You remember James and John. Who's going to be the foreign minister in the kingdom? Who's going to be the prime minister? And when they didn't quite get it done, in good Jewish mother fashion, their mother went to Jesus and said, well, how's this all going to work out? And so again and again, he had to correct people's understanding of the kingdom. If you read the scriptures, how translate the meaning of the kingdom? I think it is fair to say that the kingdom is the power of God let loose in history. The power of God let loose in history. And what let the power of God definitively loose in history was the incarnation. God comes among us, enters into the human. And so the way I picture the kingdom is it's like the current of a great river. It is beneath the surface, but like the current of every great river, the power of God is leading the world to God's final culmination. At the surface of the river, there's lots of reasons to be pessimistic. There's lots of evil in the world, lots of suffering in the world, lots of undone things. But as Christians, we believe that beneath the surface, the power of God is leading the world from its creator to its judge, from the beginning of time to the end. The world is in God's hands. What the church is asked to be is the instrument of the kingdom in history. Now, this is tricky. We actually believe the kingdom of God is wider than the church. Augustine said, some that the church has, God does not have, and some that God has are not in the church. So when people do the work of justice in any way, they cooperate in the kingdom. But what the church is a consciously aware community that we are called to the work of the kingdom. What we are to have is a conscious sense of vocation and responsibility, that if the power of God leads us toward the fulfillment of the kingdom, the church is to be, in a particular way, an instrument of the kingdom in history. Again, Francis, reading the scriptures also makes it clear that the gospel is not merely about our personal relationship with God. The gospel is about the kingdom of God. It is about loving God who reigns in our world. The reigning is a kind of archaic term, but the idea of a current that guides history is the way God reigns. Again, Francis, both Christian preaching and life, then, are meant to have an impact on society. And then this wonderful sentence hidden away in this long document. True Christian hope, which seeks the eschatological kingdom, always generates history. Christian hope generates history. We can make a difference. We can shape the injustice toward justice. We can try to increase by increments the possibility of peace. And we can feed the hungry and clothe the naked, etc., etc. The kingdom generates history, permeates the world. Francis is clear. Religion, he says, can't be reduced to the inner sanctum of personal life without influence on societal and national life, without concern for the soundness of civil institution. The Catholic Church, at its best, is never sectarian. We don't run away from the world, and we don't hate the world. We may not agree with all that goes on in the world. That's why we do the work of the kingdom. But we are to be in the midst of the world. That is the Catholic tradition. So in summary, social justice and evangelization. How do you put it together? Vatican II says justice is in the center of the church's life. Francis calls the church to be an instrument of the kingdom in history. And the final piece of this is you go from kingdom to church to world, because it is the document on the church in the world. So the world is what Vatican II calls the theater of human activity. The theater of human activity. History is one great drama, played out under the hand of God, but with human choices at the midst of it. The reason there is injustice in the world is we live in a limited world, which means it's hard to do justice, and we live in a world that is marked by sin, which makes it even harder to do justice. But the point is, it is possible. It is possible in this theater of human activity for the power and vision of the gospel to take shape. So I've always thought that the Vatican II document made a crucial choice when it did not say the church and the world. It said the church in the world, and then you work from there. Located in the world with the power and with the vision of the gospel, we're invited to do the work of evangelization. Again, to evangelize, Francis says, is to make the kingdom of God present in the world. What's our presence like? When Jesus was asked what the kingdom is like, he didn't offer a syllogism. He offered an image. They said, well, what is it like if it's not political? He said, the kingdom is like light in darkness. It's like salt in your food. The kingdom is transformative. It's like yeast in the loaf. Everything the kingdom touches, it transforms. There is resistance to transformation, human limitation and human sin. But that's why the challenge of the kingdom is only over 2 days after Jesus comes back. That's when we'll get it all together. Before that, there is no relief from the challenge of transforming history. If you look at the church in the United States, the agenda of transformation is as varied and multiple as this country, culture, and society is. There are different levels of the life of the church. There are different ministries in it. There are different needs at the local level, the national level, and the way this country plays its place in the world. Let me just indicate 3 exemplary issues, which I do not plan to play out, but 3 kinds of issues that invite the church: immigration, income, and international responsibility. If you look at the church in the United States, if you look at this culture, those 3 issues offer us examples of the work of transformation. Immigration. The fact is, it is obviously a major moral, political challenge to this country. It is also the case that the political system is paralyzed on this question. But when the political system is paralyzed in a democracy, what that does is to open up new space for what we call civil society to play a different role. If the agents of political authority don't act, the civil society can step in and act as a catalyst. If you look at the potential of the Roman Catholic Church on this issue, it is really something I think we need to think carefully about. Think back to the 1960s and the role that the African American church in this country played on civil rights. They had a legacy, they had a history, they had an experience, and they had a voice. And while many of us cooperated, there was no doubt that the African American church led the charge. If you look at the Catholic Church in the United States today, its capacity for advocacy, its capacity for action, and the fact that with varying degrees of intensity, 30 to maybe 40% of the life of the church has immediate immigrant background. This offers us the opportunity to help lead this country to a better place on this issue. It is right there before us, and we need to grasp that opportunity as we've been trying to do, but we need more of it. Income. Poverty in this country is real, obviously. Roughly 14% of the country is counted as being in poverty. Children in poverty grip us even more by the throat. Recent statistics out of Boston indicate that in the Boston area, Boston metropolitan area, 31% of the children in urban areas in Massachusetts are classified as poor. 13% of those in suburban communities are classified as poor children. 19% in rural areas. Children are a special gift and sacred trust. That is the fact. Catholic social teaching does not think you can simply equalize society. It is not a radically egalitarian faith in terms of social and economic questions. What we do believe is that you have an obligation as a society to set a floor under the dignity of every human person. And beneath that floor, people ought not to fall. The floor is about nutrition, housing, healthcare, employment, all of that range of issues. So once again, we have a teaching, we have a voice, and we have a mandate about this issue. And finally, there's international responsibility. This country will never be able only to think about the work that it does internally. We've always got to think about our impact on the world. That means different things. It means debating about war and peace. It means deciding about allocation of resources. It means the kind of vision that is held within the country about the responsibility we have. Catholic Relief Services, for example, is one of the largest relief and development agencies in the country. They have a whole U.S. program where they try to help the church in the United States understand just how the potential of this country can be realized in the life of the world. So the social ministry is central to the church's ministry. There are different levels and different tasks. The work of the evangelization, the chapter to which we are invited in this diocese and in the country, is to make the gospel and its transforming power real in the world. Parishes are yet unrealized full potential, but the invitation of the Pope has given us a new spirit of both obligation and invitation to live up to the fullness of our faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Hare. And we're going to move right now into our first panel and delve deeper into many of the themes that Father Hare just articulated for us. So invite the panelists to join me. So, Father Paul. Father Paul O'Brien. He's already there. Oh, yeah. Great, great. So the first panel today, we have an hour and 10 minutes. There are several objectives, so listen carefully. First of all, education. As Father Hare said, central to the Catholic Church, Catholic social teaching. So we want to go beyond charity and really talk about social justice. We also want practical examples of social justice programs in our parishes and sharing of best practices. And finally, suggestions for how we can incorporate social justice into the pastoral plans of the collaboratives. The format this year is going to be introductions of the panelists. They'll each have about 8 minutes to give you introductory remarks about their parishes, their work in social justice. Following this, we'll have interaction amongst the panelists. You are invited to ask questions at any time. Following that, we're going to open up to parish representatives in the audience who will give us some specific examples of what's worked in their parishes. So we have some concrete examples. And then finally, we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end. So I'm going to start by introducing Father Paul Soper and Sister Pat Boyle. As most of you will know, they run the Office of Pastoral Planning, so who better to talk about the collaboratives? And Father Paul Soper has many years of experience as a pastor, and he also has renowned technical skills, as many of you know, with computer programming and the rest. And I commend to you the website, Disciples in Mission. Outstanding transparency and extremely easy to navigate, and great resources. And Sister Pat brings great experience, not only as a pastoral associate, but a first grade teacher. And I want you to all congratulate her on her 50th Jubilee year. And not only Sister Pat, but many of the other sisters of St. Joseph who were here with us today, and Sister Mary and Beth I mentioned before. But I want to quote from their constitution, then I'm going to hand it off to both of them. This is from their website. "We stand with the poor in the struggle for justice, incarnating hope by seeking to improve the quality of human life and the care of the good earth." So, Father Paul, Sister Pat, your turn.
Thank you very much, Pat. We wanted to lay out for you a little bit of the structure of how collaboratives work with setting goals to evangelize, and what we see as the connections between the work of social justice and that primary work of the collaboratives, which is the work of evangelization. The first point that we would want to make is that we feel as though the social justice work of the church is for the church on the margin, which is where we always have to go in evangelization, is the well of credibility from which we can draw. When we open food pantries and when we are working with new peoples, and when we are standing up for the poor and the marginalized, we create people can't ignore the church in those moments. The church becomes a thing that reveals its beauty in those moments, and that opens up for us lots of different pathways to evangelization. So that simple first point, the social justice work of the church refills constantly the credibility of the church for people who are on the periphery, and it's out of that well of credibility that we evangelize.
In Disciples in Mission, which is, all of you know, is the pastoral plan for the Archdiocese, we call for the growth of the church. We call for people to become more and more aware of themselves as intentional disciples. But it's impossible to be an intentional disciple if you first and foremost don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And so what we hope happens through the work that we are engaged in is that people will move from, in particular, move from head knowledge to that heart knowledge, where they fall madly in love with Jesus Christ, and from that relationship find themselves moved out into the world, find themselves not just in a relationship of me and Jesus, but that it can no longer be a devotional experience. It has to drive us out into that kingdom where we do the work of Jesus Christ along with Christ. We're also aware that it sometimes takes a first step for us in order to become aware of our discipleship, that we sometimes find ourselves going out and being engaged in some work of charity, and that we say, well, for the good of my parish, I'll make the sandwiches for the food pantry, and you know, we don't think much more of it than that. What we need to become keenly aware of is that can sometimes be a first step of engagement for individuals in our parishes, to become aware of who is it that we're doing this work for? Who is it that we're engaging ourselves in this particular task? And so we move then, sometimes it's a place of movement from just doing a kind deed or a charitable deed to becoming transformed ourselves and wanting to be more and more engaged in discipleship.
So then, it's not only the discipleship journey of the person who is doing the social justice work of the church, who's making the sandwiches, who's running the food pantry, who's loading the shelves, who's cleaning up after the morning at the shelter, but sometimes the very people whom we're serving are themselves yearning for a relationship with Jesus. And we don't ever do this work just as a means to a different end. Feeding the hungry is in itself a good goal, and is in itself a worthy goal, and a goal that has a moral imperative for us. But that being said, the people whose lives are touched by the charitable work of the church may themselves be yearning for a relationship with Jesus, and sometimes the doing of that work can open doors there. So we always say that the volunteers who are working in every aspect of the life of the church need not only to be functionally excellent at the work that they do, but they need to themselves be trained and formed as disciple makers. So the person who is stocking the shelves at your food pantry and who's helping out at the soup kitchen, it needs to be receiving some formation in disciple making, because that's what disciples do. Disciples make disciples, so that they can understand where openings might arise for them to give witness to the ways that they're working. Additionally, we would say that the Lord told us we have to do this, and the prophets have all told us that the work that we do will be successful in as much as we foster right relationship with God, and right relationship with God always involves taking care of the poor. We have in front of us now a huge task of evangelization, and it is not a task that we can possibly accomplish by just getting all of the gears working in the right way. It's not a task that we can possibly accomplish by getting everything well planned and every I dotted and every T crossed. Essentially, if the plan of evangelization is going to work, it is going to work because the Holy Spirit infuses himself into it. And when we turn to the Spirit asking for a new Pentecost, we do so from a much better position if we do so as a community that takes care of the needy.
I'd like to just give you an example of that transformative experience, that kind of conversion that people can have. I had a conversation with a woman several years ago. She was a Eucharistic minister in a parish. And in a conversation that she had with me, she said, "Sister Pat, I had the experience." She said, "I volunteer at the local food pantry, and it's in the suburbs of this Archdiocese." She said, "I volunteer in that food pantry every week, 2 days a week." And she said, one day, a man came up to me, and I gave him his food. And she said, the following weekend, that man approached for communion. And she said, I recognized him as the man from the food pantry. And she said, all of a sudden, feeding the hungry became a new reality for me, because not only was I feeding him in the food pantry, here I was now giving him the body of Christ. She said the light went on for me. I never had that experience before where so significantly did I see myself as being Christ to another and he being Christ for me. Matthew 25, as one dear friend of ours has said, comes before Matthew 28. When did you see me hungry and give me food? Or when was I thirsty and you gave me to drink? When was I in prison and you visited me? When we recognize those experiences, it is then from that that we can then go forth and be a disciple and be a disciple maker. And so when we're working with the parishes that are in collaboratives, who are now, there are 12 collaboratives right now who are working on what we're calling local pastoral plans. Those local pastoral plans are as individual as the collaboratives are. And so what they write about their desire to become will be unique to them. But in those local pastoral plans, there may not be a very specific social justice priority that they state. But there will definitely be social justice priorities that will be articulated and found, maybe not as abundantly clear as we will feed the hungry, or we will support cor unum, or we will make a particular contribution to a local food pantry or a shelter that's near us. What we will find for some of the social justice orientations will be words like radical hospitality, inclusion of all, outreach to the missing, missionary witness, witnessing to mission. Those articulations will certainly speak to what it is that we are called to be as church. How do we open our doors to those people who are amongst us and with us and make everyone feel welcome? How do we accommodate, how do we make welcome the person who comes infrequently to our midst? And when they come, do they feel a part of us? Do we make them know they have a place with us, that we're happy to have them with us, that this is home for them? And then additionally, can we reach out to those people, those areas where we know people have not yet come to know the value of the gospel?
Thank you so much, Father Paul and Sister Pat. And before I introduce Father Paul O'Brien, I want to announce something very exciting that Father Paul and Sister Pat and I talked about this week. Now on the Disciples in Mission website, we're going to have a special part of the website dedicated to social justice. And those of you who want to establish a social justice committee will have templates that you can look at, and hopefully we'll have it interactive so we can share information. Now, great privilege to introduce Father Paul O'Brien from St. Patrick's Church in Lawrence. And he's served as pastor there now for 14 years. Economically, I think most of you know, Lawrence is one of the poorest cities in New England. He oversees a huge trilingual, multicultural parish, very large Catholic elementary school, and a big meal center, Cor Unum. Sister Pat just mentioned it. He lives in the heart of inner city Lawrence, and many of you may recall from our very first convocation 6 years ago, we showed the movie, Scenes from a Parish, which documented Father Paul and his good work. Over to you.
Great thing about smartphones is you can time yourself, so I'm going to set this up. Someday we'll be able to point this at speakers when their times run out and they can die. All right, so I was thinking of three major things in my parish that we do that I think could be connected to any parish, either directly or indirectly. So the first is, in my community, I think when I go to whatever the language or whatever the style is of worship, I feel that people are serious about Christ, that they are, in general, trying to pursue a relationship with him. They're disciples. They're really trying to be followers. So I think they are listening to him in the scripture and in the teaching of the church and are sincerely trying to listen and do what he says to do. And so in our community, because it's a wreck, because society has fallen apart in Lawrence, walking out of church every week or walking out of a prayer group or walking out of my home if I am engaged with Christ, the question is what can we do to transform this society? So one big one is we have a really strong Catholic elementary school. It is the most effective means for deeply transforming the lives of people in need. So the one thing with which I have, the one effort in my community that has the most founded hope for genuinely transforming the lives of children and families is Catholic elementary education. Lawrence Catholic Academy, in our case, is a school that we created, and it has more than 500 kids from nursery school through grade 8. Our one problem is that we don't have enough space. We're actually outgrowing our space. So when you hear about the decline of Catholic inner city education, that has to do with us. It doesn't have to do with Catholic education. If we can grab a kid in nursery school and that kid's family and lead that child through grade 8 We don't need any more data on this, whether kids come from drug houses or they come from our limited number of stable families. Those kids can, in fact, get into whatever the select high school is that will transfer them, hopefully, to a college education. So if there's one thing that you can say in a vibrant Catholic parish in this country, in the inner city, that really has the most hope, I believe it's Catholic elementary education. If your parish isn't connected with an inner city Catholic school, I think you should really consider doing that. Many inner city Catholic schools are not so good. They could really use the time and the talent of people who have gifts that maybe are not common in the inner city. Many Catholic inner city schools are excellent, and if they're excellent, usually their biggest need is money. We have people who sponsor kids in my community. They say, we'll take you from nursery school through grade 8, and we'll provide the full education. It's $4,000 a year. Every parish, I would think every parish should be doing that. At least one kid. My parish takes the first cut of our collection every week and gives it to Lawrence Catholic Academy. Why wouldn't a parish in Natick do the same thing? You can take the life of a kid for $4,000 and almost guarantee that family success. It's pretty amazing use of dollars. So I'd encourage you to consider, how are you connected to inner city Catholic education? Second idea is, and I because my opinions are so exalted, I think this really, when I'm Pope, this is on the top 10 list. And we're just timing that one too. We have a St. Vincent group in our community, not to be confused with the Society of St. Vincent de Paul of the Archdiocese of Boston, whose attorneys will hit me if I confuse those words. But we have a St. Vincent group. It's kind of the model that you would have in a traditional St. Vincent de Paul group. There are 15 or 20, probably 15 parishioners at any given time who are focused on being the responders to basic social needs that anybody has who communicates with our parish. Shouldn't we have a couple of dependable people online every day in every community to answer the needs of anybody, any need whatsoever? So we have a person or two with a cell phone, and the cell phone just gets passed on, who respond to those calls 365 days a year. The one or two people meet with whoever has the need, usually in the home, sometimes in the parish, wherever it is. They assess the need, they talk to the person, they express love, they give whatever counsel there is, and then once a month we figure out, is there money that we can give to the people who are in need. We spend down all of our money, so whatever we've got each month, that's what we spend. We know we've given everything that we practically can give. Why is this so important? Because whether you're in Concord, Massachusetts or Lawrence, Massachusetts, if you have a physical need, a practical need, and you're turning to the body of Christ, someone should respond. Most of what we do is referring people to agencies other than ours, to people who can help more profoundly than we can in a given situation. Sometimes it is about money, but it's always about love. So if you're in physical need, it's very unusual to encounter love in this country. You encounter professionals who are putting you through a system, but someone who cares about you, who challenges you if you need to be challenged, who gives you a sense of reality of what's out there and guides you to whatever is practically possible. How could we have a Catholic parish that doesn't have that? So I think that's something everybody can do. In my first parish in which I served in Concord, Massachusetts, is one of the wealthiest communities in the United States. There were many, many economically poor people in that community. They should have had the church, and they did to a large extent, as the place where they could go to have their needs met. Y'all still awake? Okay. Next one is the other problem with phones is they go off. All right. So here's a big thing my parish does, and I think you certainly could be connected to this in terms of my parish, but I think every parish should do something like this. So in Lawrence, 75% of children are at risk for hunger at any given time. It's amazing. First thing Jesus says in Matthew 25, in our eternal judgment, and therefore I presume his judgment of me today, first two things. When I was hungry, you made a choice. You either fed me or you did not feed me. When I was thirsty, you either gave me drink or did not give me drink. In my community, it was clear 15 years ago that for all the good that was being done, including through my parish, not enough was being done to meet this ginormous need of hunger in the community, particularly for children. So in a conversation after a Thanksgiving dinner in 2001 for some homeless folks that lived behind my house, 8 or 10 people said, what could we do to really put into practice Matthew 25 in the ideal way? Between that conversation in 2001 at Thanksgiving and 5 years later, we ended up designing and building this meal center, Corona Meal Center, which is a huge, brand new, beautiful facility in which restaurant quality meals are served by waiters and waitresses 365 days a year, breakfast and dinner, to anybody who's hungry in Lawrence. And we said the goal here, it's kind of the evolution was, we're going to build the dream place and we're going to feed anybody who's hungry in this entire city until there are no more hungry people. We didn't have a dime, we didn't have any experience in this, but we said that's the goal. That's how can we be Catholic and not do this in this community. 5 years after that, we opened that center. We started a t-shirt company to raise the money. The t-shirt company has raised $6 million now. We, asked people for the advice. How do you build this? How would you design it? Blah, blah, blah. We opened it. So we now serve 250,000 meals a year in one parish. 250,000 meals a year. Everyone who's hungry in Lawrence who wants to be fed can be fed through our meal center. It is predominantly, the largest percentage of people we feed every day are children. It does turn out that the largest group of people who are hungry are children. But it's one thing our parish can say, for all the mess and for all of our failures in our parish, for all the things we don't do, we really handle hunger. I think every parish should do that. There should be something, just look around you in your community. There should be some social issue in your community that your parish can just say, this is one thing we absolutely do. The one I would particularly invite you to consider is the elderly. In every single one of our communities in Massachusetts, the elderly are cast-offs, by and large. We have nursing homes that might even be lovely facilities in which the majority of people are facing the wall. If I were going to start a new program, it would probably be turn the chairs. All these elderly people in lovely or not so lovely facilities are parked facing walls in wheelchairs all day long. What would be so difficult in a suburban community or an urban community? Wouldn't even involve money. What would be so difficult for a Catholic parish to say, we're going to take this on. We are going to be sure that nobody in this community is facing the wall. We're going to go out, we're going to get into every facility that there is, we're going to go out to all the homebound, and we're going to be sure that everyone who's a senior has love, has companionship, has the answer to questions, has a dignified death, has somebody to mourn them when they do die. What would be so difficult about that? I don't think it would cost anything. I don't think it would take more than a year or two for the biggest parish to address that in our biggest city. And I think that a community, any parish, could be those are the people who really live the love of Christ for that group. You could do that about children, you could do that about whatever. But I'll shut up and press, but I have 5 seconds left. Think about the elderly.
Wow. Thank you, Father Paul. We're going to come back to each one of those. And what I'd love to do is be able to document some of those goals in the pastoral plans and put in milestones and all the rest. And now, what a delight to introduce Father Jerry Ostermann, continuing in this vein of actions in parishes. Now, Father Jerry serves both in Immaculate Conception Parish in Everett and St. Catherine Drexel in Dorchester Roxbury. But the other very special part of the story for Father Jerry is that for the last 30 years he has been leading the way for St. Boniface Haiti Foundation, and he will be happy to tell you that this started with a walk for hunger at the poorest parish in Quincy over 30 years ago, and he will tell you about small beginnings and how we can grow from there. The foundation is extraordinary. For those of you who don't know it, go on the website and look, but also talk to Father Jerry. It improves the life of the poor in Haiti by facilitating access to quality, affordable health care, education opportunities, community development programs. But the thing I like is it empowers Haitians to help Haitians. Anyway, Father Jerry, you can explain it better than I can.
Thank you, Pat. I feel like a mosquito in a nudist colony. So much territory to cover, I don't know where to begin. But maybe we can, I think everybody here individually is very charitable. Everybody here in parishes do charity very, very well. And I'd like to see if we can move our thinking a bit from charity to justice. And Father Brian here mentioned that this issue of social justice on the parish level is difficult to tackle. Maybe we could bracket our thinking this morning between two thoughts. The first is a quote from Paul Farmer, the founder of Partners in Health. The idea that some lives matter less is the root of all that is wrong with the world. And bracket that, close the brackets with, to change the world, we must be good to those who cannot repay us. And that was a tweet on October 18th of Pope Francis. And for a moment, let's think about that scripture passage that has been mentioned several times already this morning, Matthew 25. Think of the verses. I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. A stranger, and you welcomed me. Naked, and you clothed me. Ill, and you cared for me. In prison, and you visited me. Now, let's just ask the question, why, after each verse? Hungry. Why? It brings us to the justice issue of the world's food supply and its distribution, which is a political issue. We're not overpopulated. Thirsty. Why? Water scarcity. Potable water. Haiti, for example, has the lowest water table in the world, and there is great fear that the water will be salinated very soon because it is an island and you have to dig so deep in order to get potable water. The stranger, why? The immigration issue that Father Hare mentioned. Naked, why? The dignity of work and the issue of unemployment. Ill, why? Healthcare, is it a human right? Prison, why? Prisons and reform. Is it possible perhaps that judges could sentence offenders to education? The question why moves us from charity to justice, from sharing our goods to giving another what is another's due. My understanding of social justice moved from a theory to a passion. The first time I held a starving child and he died in my arms, I thought he was almost 2 years old, only to find out that he was 4 years old. And that was 32 years ago. In the context of social justice, I see the parish as the mustard seed of the Gospels. And maybe I could just give two examples. At Immaculate Conception in Everett, we have a monthly collection that we call Spare Change. It's the only collection where we ask that you give no more than $1. Paul never does that. Some years ago, this was a suggestion from CRS in connection with their Lenten Rice Bowl effort. And we instituted it in the parish on a monthly basis. And we've built a social center in a rural village in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a clinic in Uganda, dug wells and helped with the water system for a remote village in Uganda, paid for the education of a doctor and a dentist and several nurses. The point being for us is how much can be done with so little. The mustard seed. And the second example is the one that Janine mentioned, which was born of a small social justice committee in Quincy Parish, St. Boniface, which is now closed. And from the efforts of that small group of parishioners has grown a hospital, really a health care system in the southern peninsula of Haiti, with a budget this year of $7 million and with 250 native employees. During our first 10 years of existence, we rarely received a donation of more than $100. But the mustard seed does indeed grow into a tree that holds the birds of the air. And I firmly believe that no small efforts in the name of the poor go unheeded. Thank you.
I hope everybody's taking notes. You've had some excellent recommendations, not beyond the power of any of the people in this room to implement. But I want to go back to the beginnings. Father Paul and Father Jerry. You used the analogy of the mustard seed, but how do you get started? Father Paul, how did you get started? Was it a core group of people? Did you get involved personally? How did you do it?
Yeah, it's just a core group of people who have brains and say, what's the problem? And, why is it? And then what could we do? And if it's something you haven't yet done, you go out to other folks who are already doing it and benefit from what they're doing and say, do you see the need? And if you could start all over, what would your dream be? You get great suggestions from people who are already doing this kind of, whatever this work is. I think you pray and you keep asking one another, do we think this is the Lord's will? And until you feel it's not God's will, you keep pursuing it. If it is God's will, practical things will come. Money will come, people will come. And at some point you may realize no money is coming, no people are coming, this isn't working, so it's not God's will. We move on to something else.
But I loved your business model as well with the T-shirts and generating some income.
Yeah, so it's a company called Labels Are for Jars, labelsareforjars.org, and there's no way we're going to get millions of dollars from Lawrence to feed our own people. So how do we get out there, get this message out there, and invite people to give us money? So we design T-shirts that catch people's attention. They're sold in plastic mason jars that have a hole in the top. You wear the shirt, you put money in the jar, and you collect your money in the jar and send it to us to feed people. Again, we've raised about $6 million through that. What was so hard about that? It took, a while to develop that concept, but I think probably about a year. And then, God gave us brains.
But again, I'd love to see this documented in the collaborative, so we can do that. And Father Jerry, in terms of St. Boniface, Haiti, because I think you said $6 million for the clinics and the schools. How'd you do that?
Well, the same, a small group of people in the parish that were interested in the issue of hunger, and we made a decision to have a walk for hunger on Good Friday, and that half of the proceeds would stay in Quincy for the poor in Quincy and half would go someplace else. And maybe the providential element was that it was around the time that Mother Teresa received the Peace Prize. And there was an article in the New York Times Magazine about her home for children in Haiti. And the group decided that they wanted the money to go there. And so my thought was to give the money to someone I knew who went to Haiti to deliver it. And I know now what she did, I do myself. She said, well, why don't you come with me and bring the check? So it was tempting. She was going in January, and that's a nice time of year for us to go to the Caribbean. And she said, ask your people. And I said, well, It'll be after Christmas. It's a poor parish. They will have blown all their money on their children. None of them will go. Well, there were 12 in the group. I asked, and 11 went. And I think once you go to any country in the developing world, it happened to be Haiti for us, which is only an hour away from our shores. I think you can't be but touched, and it never becomes only one trip.
Sure.
Yeah, so I will give us some credit on this. I think a difference in success is you do find people who say, we are really going to commit ourselves to doing this. There's a lot of Chardonnay Catholicism in the social justice world, I think. You know, we talk about this, we do a little, then we have a glass of wine, and that's the end. So, you know, will I really be committed to this inner city Catholic school? Will I really be committed to this new effort in my parish? Will I really be committed to the elderly in wherever? I think the answer is no, in many cases, for people who kind of dabble in this.
Well, for those of us in the room today, here's our chance to make a commitment. We've got some practical examples. But I want to ask Father Paul and Sister Pat how you actually incorporate that and put it into milestones and, you know, get people involved, the practical realities.
Sure. So many of our the 12 Phase 1 collaboratives right now are well on their way to having their first drafts completed of their local pastoral plans, and many of them have social justice outreach things as being significant goals in what they're doing. And the way that they work that through is that they identify a goal. The goals are always SMART goals. Now, SMART, of course, is an acronym, and there are as many definitions of SMART as people who use it. But the way that we define it is S is for specific and measurable, M is for motivating, A is for attainable, R is for relevant, and T is for trackable and time-bound. They set a very specific goal for themselves, and then and the goal always has dates associated with it. By July 1st, 2017, we will have done this, and then they break that up into tasks that are associated with that goal. Then there are worksheets in which they figure out how much exactly is this going to cost, so that we can get it into the parish budget. Nothing kills motivation in a parish as much as having a great concept that never makes it into the budget. But when there's a number associated with it that forces it into the budget, then the goals say whose responsibility is it to do this task, and this task? How many hours a week is that going to require for that person to do? So getting down into a great level of specificity. But having the goal be something that's simple enough so that everybody in the parish or the parishes of the collaborative can say, this is one of the goals of my parish. They may not know that that Mary works on this for 8 hours a week, but they all can say the establishment of a food pantry by July 1st, 2017 is a goal of my parish. And then the parish councils on a quarterly basis review the goals, and they report to the parishioners about how are we doing on this goal. They also report to the Archbishop, who has approved their plan. How are we doing on the goals? The plans are for a particular amount of time. They're for 3 years. And then at the end of the 3 years, you take a year off, you rewrite, you reflect on where you've gone, and then you come up with another plan, which hopefully is bolder, it gets you further along the way toward evangelization and all of the things that are associated with it.
Can I say something, Pat? One of the things that I think, as I listen to Father Paul and to Father Jerry, one of the things, and we're trying to communicate this to the parishes of the collaboratives, is get past that old thing of assumed constraints. Get past that. You talk about, Father Paul talks about being able to get people who will be willing to support a child for a school year, pay the tuition. Get Haiti, an operation for Haiti, up and running. the group of people that came together let go of their assumed constraints. They said, okay, let's see if we can do this. It was almost as though it became a challenge. And too often we say, oh, we tried it. We did it for 6 months and then it stopped. Nobody else contributed. Get past those assumed constraints now, because the Pope is calling us to be engaged in ways that we never believed we would be called to be engaged.
I'd also say that there's an energy associated with the coming together of the collaboratives that can sometimes be the push that you need to get over the hill, to get past thinking we have to do it this way. The energy to get over the hill to a place that you've chosen as being where you want to go.
And don't wait for the collaboratives. There's some urgency about these issues. Don't wait. Act now. Bring these ideas back. You've had some specific examples. Now, if anyone has questions, raise your hands, and then we're going to go on to the parish representatives. Please. You want the mic?
Yes, Father Jerry mentioned moving beyond charity to justice, and I'm just wondering where advocacy fits into this, because the church has a lot of statements on peace and justice. We had the bishop's letter of challenge on peace in 1983, and even though there are sometimes statements made by our bishops and some clergies, there's not a lot in the parishes to really challenge people to even examine, for example, on war. We have in the letter that the challenge of peace, the bishops, that letter outlines the so-called just war tradition, but that's never discussed. And on issues of poverty, at the end of the day, a lot of this will have to be resolved by our country putting resources in a different place. We have the resources in this country, but they're not allocated towards the right places. Thank you.
Right. Well, I think there's another possibility. Obviously, some of the issues are bigger than individuals, bigger than an individual parish. But in this archdiocese, I can think of 3, anyway, organizations that deal with some of the larger issues that affect all of us, like urban education, healthcare, etc. And one is GBIO, Greater Boston Interfaith Organization. Another is ECHO. Please don't ask me I can't remember what the initials stand for. And another is the Mystic Valley organization. And they bring together parishes, they organize parishes of all faiths, parishes, synagogues, and mosques, and organize people to challenge the political powers to be, to speak truth to power about some of the larger issues that you mentioned. And I think that the fodder for their work so very often are the social documents, the social justice documents of the church. So I think that a parish needs to see itself not only in isolation, but in relationship with others. And when those relationships are built, there's great power there.
Yeah, so I think on the local level, if in your parish you're not hearing advocacy about issues and preaching regularly, come to my parish. And if you don't want to do that, talk to your pastor. It can be delicate, but it's probably part of lousy preaching in general. So stepping up and helping, talking to a pastor, again, it's very delicate, but you got to go directly to the person, and you need to speak to him about what you have in mind. You need to help him with education, and push for that. There are agencies of the Archdiocese that touch on most active social issues. Whether those agencies are doing anything, I honestly have no idea. Some of them may be doing a lot, some of them may be doing absolutely nothing. But there is a structure, and I would encourage you to connect with the people in charge of that structure and be loving and be critical. If they're not, no one from Catholic Charities until 2 weeks ago ever set foot in Cor Unum. I think that's ridiculous. Ridiculous. You know, we've got this national publicity, international publicity. No one ever set foot. I don't know why. Maybe they're busy with a lot of things. So, you know, you're probably onto something, but do something about it.
Oh, I have.
Good. Okay. I mean, yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions?
Well, to follow up on the international piece and on advocacy, I would urge everyone in this room to consider opening a chapter in your parish for Bread for the World. And the website is very easy, bread.org. And it was founded back in the 70s by a bunch of Catholic priests, women religious, and Protestant ministers who realized that the food pantries, the local charity efforts weren't going to do enough. And what we do is work on bipartisan, very inclusive legislation to combat domestic poverty and hunger and international poverty and hunger. And I call it ecumenism at its best. Jerry says reaching out to making these kinds of... One of our great success stories was, remember John Paul II joined with many other leaders to call for the Jubilee campaign for debt relief to celebrate the millennium, so that very heavily indebted countries, especially in Africa, could free up money for health and education. A bunch of Catholics and Presbyterians in Birmingham, Alabama, educated themselves on the issues. They would write letters to their members of Congress after church on Sunday. They went to visit their members of Congress in district and in Washington. And a moderate Republican from Birmingham, Alabama, who keyed this key subcommittee, Spencer Baucus, became the most outspoken champion for debt relief. And because of those efforts, we got $2.1 billion of debt relief for Africa. And because of that, over 2 million children in Africa, especially girls, are now going to school. So I'm just encouraging people to look at the big structural piece, to do advocacy. It's very rewarding. And, you know, our Massachusetts delegation, like Jim McGovern, they vote the right way on hunger and justice. But we want them to become leaders on the fight on hunger and justice. So it's one way to get involved.
Got 2 or 3 more questions, but I need to leave time for the parish representative.
On the issue of getting past constraints, one experience that we've had is that in our St. Vincent de Paul Society, a call came in from a woman who was labeled as a hoarder. She was being evicted and she had to be moving on. And of course there was some discussion, well, this isn't St. Vincent de Paul work to go in and clear out a person's accumulation of material goods and so forth. But by carrying through, by going against the grain, getting beyond the constraint and doing that, it then became a question of us raising the question, why is this woman being evicted? Where is she going to go? There are very few opportunities for somebody in this situation. Another little thing about getting past constraints is calls come in from a distance to the local parish on St. Vincent de Paul needs from St. Vincent de Paul. And a wonderful man who was sort of the chairperson, he felt that wherever the call comes, we ought to be able to do something. And if a call to another parish doesn't work, I was one day on the street about a month ago, and a woman came up to me. She says, "Where is that man John? He was so good to me." And so I said, "Well, he passed away a year ago." And she said, "Oh, I'm so sad about that." She said, "You know, I was in a very needy situation," and I said, "Really?" And I said, "Well, he did so many wonderful things. He went up to Chelmsford one night to help a woman, and he did a second time." She said, and I said, how do we know about this? She says, "I am that woman."
I promised the parish representatives we'd give you 2 minutes each. So those of you who have prepared remarks, identify yourself, your parish, and give examples of some of your social justice programs. Who wants to go first?
Good morning. My name is Sarman Ashkori. I'm from the Iraqi Catholic community in Newton, Our Lady of Mesopotamia. I don't know if you follow the news recently or in the past year or so. A lot of Catholics, Christians in Iraq and Syria and Middle East are being killed, executed, genocide in Middle East, especially in Iraq. And people who were able to escape from the ISIS death are now living under tents in the snow and the water with no food, no clean water to drink. And those people are actually doctors, nurses, teachers, engineers, who pretty much they were stripped from everything they had and were able to walk miles and miles to a safe land in order to survive. Those are actually original Christians, Catholics, who been since Jesus' time. Nothing a lot is going on to help them. I mean, political side, money being sent, but not enough. I mean, what can Catholic Church can do to save those people in Iraq, especially?
Hi, my name is Mary Campion, and we're here from St. Agatha Parish in Milton, Quincy. And could I just have the people from St. Agatha stand so that when you come by our table that you'll know who to talk to? So these are the folks that are with us today. Some of our programs include Catholic Relief Services, Helping Hands. We package 10,000 meals to feed the poor in Burkina Faso, Africa. We work with the St. Roch Haiti Foundation, and our pastor, Father Peter Casey, will be going with 8 other parishioners to Haiti later next month. And I want to introduce you to Pat Kelleher, who's heads up Caring Circle, which is an organization similar to what Father Paul talked to you about, but we don't do money like St. Vincent Group. It's time and talent, and come by and talk to Pat later. So here's Pat.
Thank you, Mary. Our Caring Circle is a wonderful organization. What we do is we have a hotline that people can call 24/7. It does not go into anyone's home. What happens is we get it on our smartphone or we get it on our computer that a call has come in. We have 8 to 10 core team members who then will answer the calls and be a resource for the people who need help. So again, we have brochures. We'd like other parishes to try this. It's all done by computers. We have 160 volunteers. So if somebody calls and says they need help, we can give the email message to the 160 volunteers, and then they in turn will contact us to say, yes, I can help this weekend. I can shovel snow for that elderly person. I can help with transportation. So again, it's a wonderful resource for people, and it's non-denominational. Thank you.
And as Mary said, immediately following this session at 10:30, we're going to adjourn for the extended networking. You'll have a chance to talk to the parishes who are set up in the dining room. Who's next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Suzanne Noceller, and I'm a parishioner at St. Joseph St. Luke's Collaborative. I'm just going to give you a brief background. We've only been at this, this is our 4th year, but we started out really as a prayer group. And Father Paul, your documentary inspired us. We used that, we prayed with that. We continue to use scripture at every meeting, so prayer is very important to us. And it's through prayer that we came to, it took us about a year to get a mission statement. So once we did that, it's the people who participated, which was a small group, and again, it was from this prayer group. What happened was they brought passion with them. They had causes that they were passionate about. And because they were passionate about these causes, the rest of us became passionate about the causes. And currently we're working on 4 issues, homelessness, human sexual trafficking, hunger, and immigration. And those are done in small groups. It wasn't until we began in 2011, and it wasn't until 2013 that we became a collaborative. And that was a very easy transition, because there had been members on the social justice group, in the social justice group from St. Joseph's, and now that has really grown as well. Our big topic is human sexual trafficking, and we started, Sister Pat mentioned this, with charity. We started collecting money and gift cards for the girls when they started school, so they would have new gym equipment, they would have new clothing, school equipment, and that opened up a whole avenue for people in our parishes to see and learn about this program called My Life, My Choice. And eventually what we did that first year was we invited Audrey Porter, who is one of the co-founders of My Life, My Choice, to our parish. She spoke. She did live in what was called the life. So she's a survivor. She gave witness to her experience. That helped to educate our parishioners and the community. We invited the community in as well. The following year, we did another program with My Life, My Choice, which involved some artistic work. There was another witnessing, and there was a group called Agape that did a beautiful dance, artistic dance to this story. And this year, we're working with My Life, My Choice, and I hope you stop by our table. You'll find the flyer. We're going to be screening a movie, a documentary called Trick, February 25th at the Belmont Studio Cinema. So, and also pick up a little card. It kind of tells a little bit about us, our mission statement, and so forth. Okay, I'm going to stop. That was 4 years. 4 years.
Terrific. Who's next? Yep. Right. Great. Thank you. Who else have we got?
I was waiting for you to come to this side of the room because that's a big social justice issue, right? Okay. Okay. My name is Sister Catherine McGrath. I'm a Sister of Charity of Halifax, and I rejoice in everything that goes on in St. Patrick's and Lawrence. I was nominated to represent a wonderful group of people who form a peace and justice cluster at St. Mary of the Angels Parish in Eggleston Square in Roxbury. We're kind of like a mustard seed insofar as we are still, after 100 years of existing in Eggleston Square, we are still only a basement church. We won't tell you all the reasons why, but I think when I tell you what our commitment is, you'll know that size doesn't matter. That the library next door is bigger than the church, but miracles come out of the committed people of St. Mary of the Angels. Some of the members of that cluster are present here today, so I'd ask you to please stand and support me. Okay. Our parish mission statement has stated for a number of years that we are to commit ourselves seriously to the promotion of peace and justice in our neighborhood and the broader world. We have and we do sponsor and collaboratively participate in neighborhood peace vigils. And unfortunately, when you live in an area like ours, you sponsor too many peace vigils. We also collaborate in community building activities with other agencies in the Eggleston neighborhood to bring about a more dignified way of life for all those who live there. We have now a large banner that hangs from the front of our parish house, which states, "No more hurting people." And you might remember those were the words of young Martin Richard, who had drawn that on a school paper a short time before the marathon bombing. In the spring, we dedicated a very small piece of land, because we don't have much land, a very small piece of land, and we made it into a peace garden. And on that property, there is a pole that states in 8 languages, "May peace prevail in our land." Many of our neighbors, our young people, cut through that piece of property to get back out onto Columbus Ave. So it's noticed. Our prayer for peace is visible every day. Very recently, members of this committee participated in the Save the Children March and Rally, where we went from Copley Square to the State House. When we had so many saying, "Send them home, close the borders," there were many of us who said, "What can we do?" Members have also stood in an ecumenical prayer vigil outside the Suffolk County House of Correction to express solidarity and hope to immigration detainees and their families. Bi-monthly, we sell fair trade, equal exchange products after each one of our masses, and we also made a commitment to use this coffee for all parish events. These Sundays raise awareness and support of poor farmers in developing countries. Also, our petitions at Sunday Masses are so inclusive. We here, at our English Mass, we pass the microphone around, and it will bring tears to your heart and to your face when you hear the people throughout that church adding petitions. They are so inclusive because they express the cries of today's world. Peace, all of the events for our Peace and Justice cluster are in the bulletin. And also, a member of this cluster speaks and invites members of the community to participate with us. Our response has always been very supportive in keeping what is our parish mission. We try, with the messiness and everything else in our daily lives, to be a Beatitude church, to be the Catholic Church, proudly in Eggleston Square in Roxbury. Amen.
Wonderful, thank you. And people can visit your exhibit.
Hi, my name is Fran Ludwig, and I'm from St. Bridget and Sacred Heart in Lexington. Our Christian Service Commission members are here. Some of them, can they stand up, please? Over here. Many of the 20 Christian service ministries at our parishes help to educate, motivate, and activate parishioners to work for social justice. Our most successful strategies include engaging parishioners during or after Masses. Since everybody's busy during the week, we have to catch them while they're here. And in order to do that, for example, our Faith and Environment Ministry plans seasonal Sunday liturgies and prayer services focused on the care of creation based on the Catholic Climate Covenant. We also encourage homilies and prayers of the faithful, as you said. We suggest a few to help the pastor along. And sometimes he actually takes them. it also helps to raise awareness when those references are made to our social justice ministries. Our long-term relationship with our sister parishes, St. Catherine Drexel in Roxbury, St. Patrick in Roxbury, those in Haiti and Honduras, are often referred to by our celebrants. So it's important to get them to our meetings as well so they know what's happening. At the end of Mass, a personal invitation, as you said, from a lay leader is very effective. For example, inviting parishioners to join in legislative letter writing for Bread for the World. The weekly coffee hour after Mass, with fair trade coffee, of course, and the annual ministry fair are good times to give longer presentations on ministries and to connect with potential volunteers. Storytelling is very important. You've heard it right up here. Your ears perk up. So when volunteers return from Honduras and they give vivid accounts of how our parish's support for education has made a difference in the lives of people in our sister parishes there. It's clear that the lives of the volunteers have changed too. So I think for everybody, it's a two-way street towards solidarity, not just giving things to people. Our parish bulletin always contains announcements about upcoming social justice opportunities. For example, the social justice study group that we've had for years, led by Sister Ruth Rosenbaum. She's here from CREA today, visit in the exhibit area. I'm almost finished. Finally, fundraising dinners also help parishioners to learn of ministries in a very gentle way. For example, our pre- and post-release prison ministry at MCI Framingham. Sister Maureen Clark is the shepherd on that one. A former prisoner gave a moving account about how such support helped her at a recent dinner, and that resulted in a number of new volunteers. Would be happy to talk with you in the exhibit area at the end.
And thanks to Fran, who is one of our committee members planning this. Holy Family Rockland, should we go?
Thank you very much. I'm Susan Matthews. I'm from Holy Family Parish in Rockland, Mass. And we have several ministries. The one I'm going to talk about now is our Honduras ministry. Over 20 years ago, Father Richard Donahue approached our pastor, Father Jim Hickey, and a relationship began, and we now have a sister parish down there in Juticalpa, Honduras. We, several years later, after having supported this parish and the education through our Beacus program, which is bringing education, Christianity, and scholarship, supporting the students in their school, we decided it was time to visit the place that we've been supporting for so long. So 9 years ago was our first mission trip, and our next mission trip, our 9th mission trip, will be in April. We've had many people join us and go on the trip, and they've all come back changed. We bring down our love and our support and our willingness to do whatever it is they want us to do. There are other teams that go down, and they may be medical teams or specific engineers. We're not those people. So we go down. We've brought rice and beans to the villages. We bring water to the places that don't have water. We have a giant fire truck down there that is a water tanker, and we fill it, bring it to the villages, and the people come from miles with their buckets, and they get drinking water, which they otherwise do not have. So we do many things down there. There is a special needs school that Padre started, and there are about 64 students in there now that many of them are supported through our scholarship program. We are the fun team. Besides bringing food and water, we take the special needs student to a water park, which is about their only field trip they get every year. Some of them have never been to a water park. They've never seen clean water, and this is about the cleanest water they see while they're there. So as I said, we're going again in April, and we have many pictures and things for you to take a look at afterwards. I also have Deborah Delpret here to speak for a second.
One of the things that we do locally is we have a breakfast club, and what it is we have about 50 volunteers who go 6 groups to satellite branches of the Pine Street, and we bring them breakfast, and we cook them bacon, eggs, toast, home fries. They love us coming. We take requests. We bring them certain juices if they like certain juices. It's just a wonderful program. So each group goes, the 6 groups go to, we have 3 houses that we go to. So it's an easy thing that anybody could do. There's always people around here that need, food. They have to take care of themselves over the weekends because everybody knows of all the budget cuts. So it's one of the meals that we know that they will get every day. We bring extra food so they can have throughout the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. St. Cecilia, Boston. If we have anybody from St. Cecilia, right here. And then St. Peter's, we're done.
Thank you. Mark Lippold from St. Cecilia Parish in Boston. I'm here with colleagues Susan Donnelly and Tom Ash. Our primary focus has been on Catholic education, prison and after, homelessness and hunger, as well as Haiti. You've heard a lot of great things from everyone else. I know we're pressed on time. Other things that we do, we try to integrate our children's faith formation program into all we do from a social justice point of view. So once a month, our children go and serve dinner at the Pine Street Women's Inn. Our children also draw holiday cards for people at Bridgewater State Hospital. We involve them in everything that we do. We're strong supporters of Catholic Charities Food Pantry in Dorchester, and at the offertory procession at every Sunday Mass, children bring forth gifts that we donate to Catholic Charities. We believe that consistency is important. By their very nature, there are events that are one-year occurrences, but the more you can do things time and time again, our prison and after ministry hosts a dinner in our parish hall every single Monday for folks, so that consistency is important. And part of that is not getting hung up on numbers and metrics and doing it because it's right and knowing that over time it will build.
Thank you so much. And Anna from St. Peter's.
Hi, thank you. When our parish went through the Arise program several years ago, that seemed to be a catalyst for people to think about this and what can we do for them. So that we have done. And then we also linked up with the Harvard Square Meals Program that was started by 10 churches in Harvard Square. So we called them and said, what are your needs? And it turns out that places like that, especially in the city of Cambridge, rely on college students a lot. So when college students go away, that seemed to be a good time for our parish to get up and move. But as Pat and I have been talking several times, because we have the wonderful privilege of having Pat at St. Peter's, is how can we move those programs that we do seem to be very much in the shoe of charity, and how can we add our other foot of works of justice in a way that's meaningful. And it seems to be that we always talk about, what else is going on, and is there a way that we can connect in? And that seems to be at the crux of where we are at now. And, an example of that is our St. Vincent de Paul Society at the church. They were kind of saying to just a couple of us, we're really, not, our numbers are going down and we're older. And really that's all it took was all of us to know that. And now we have, we've doubled, if not done a little more, of the St. Vincent de Paul, and that group has re-energized and is going out there doing great work. So I'm open. I'll be in the exhibition center, but I'm open for suggestions as to how to make that next connection of the works we do to a more ongoing works of justice.
And Anna, we've gotten a lot of good ideas for today. And Father Lenny O'Malley, our pastor, is standing in the back, who's leading the way as we moved from charity to social justice. Thank you all. Thank Father Paul, Sister Pat, Father Paul, Father Jerry. Outstanding panel. But thank you also, all of you who spoke, and all of you who are silently working for social justice. Well kept secret in the Catholic Church, how many good works are being done. Now, we have an extended coffee break for the next 45 minutes. Take a look, go around, network with people who have set up exhibitions in the cafeteria and the dining room, and then be back here, please, by 11:15 for our next panel. Thank you.
I'm Dr. Vito Nicastro, and I'm here with my colleague, Father David Michael. We are the Associate Directors under Bishop Arthur Kennedy of the Office for Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs at the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Boston. And we're here to say a word about the commitment and the leadership And we're here to say a word
If I could ask people to please start to get to your chairs, that would be wonderful. Here for the last week and a half, and they were quite exhausted, but they really rose to the occasion today to share their dancing and their music with you. So I want to welcome you back for the second panel, and the title of this is Interfaith Community Outreach to Overcome Violence. And we had such a wonderful, engaged interaction this morning, and we encourage that again this afternoon. We're all extremely aware of the issue of violence. We see it every night when we watch the news. We see it every morning when we wake up. It's very prevalent throughout the world and in many particular places in these days. However, we also have it in our own communities, and it's very important for us to focus on that as well. In our homes, with domestic violence, on our streets in our communities, in many places, with disaffected youth and those who have been perhaps excluded from opportunities in our system and in our communities. So we keep all of that in mind. The root causes, what are those root causes of the violence that exists, and how do we address that? Father here this morning, touching on many of the points in the Pope's exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, spoke about that central call to the social aspect of the gospel. And I know we have a number of deacons and deacon candidates here, and so that's at the heart of the diaconal charism, the diaconal call, but it's also at the heart of the diaconal call for all of us in our parishes, right? Is to be advocates for those who are marginalized, to be advocates for those who are left out, to be advocates for those who are in need of the basics in human dignity and human life. And so we want to speak to that now from the lived experience and from what it is that we can do. How do we address this issue of violence in our communities? How do we in our parishes find ways to make a difference? Find ways to be peacemakers. As we go back to the Beatitudes, blessed are the peacemakers. And so those issues of exclusion and inequality are some of the roots that we need to pay attention to. So what we're going to do today with our panel, we have a wonderful panel with great experience here, and we're very, very blessed to have them here. I'm going to introduce them and then ask each of them to spend a few minutes sharing some of their own experiences in their own communities, in their own work that they do around this issue of violence. What has been the experience that they've encountered, and how have they tried to do outreach to have an impact on mitigating that in some way in the communities? And then also, how is it that we might start to find ways to interact, ways to connect, ways to bring the broader Christian churches together and all faiths together to address these fundamental issues that are in our communities so that we can move to be a people of peace and to live the gospel and to be able to connect into that great current in the great river, as Father Brian here mentioned, that movement of the Spirit and that movement of the kingdom of God. So let me introduce our panelists today, and I'll start with Dr. Vito Nicastro, who works here in the Archdiocese as a member of the Office for Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs. He's the co-director there. Vito has earned degrees from Brown University, Master's in Divinity from Weston Jesuit School of Theology, and his doctorate from Boston College in the history of Christian life and thought. He's worked in issues around ecumenism since 1990. You must have been very young when you started that work, Vito. 4 years old. It's very impressive. He was a prodigy, a child prodigy. Published a book entitled From Division to Christian Unity, and also serves on the North American Orthodox Catholic Theological Consultation, sponsored by USCCB. Father David Michael is not here, who is the other director of that same office here in the Archdiocese, who serves as liaison to the Jewish community in addition to that, Catholic chaplain to Brandeis University and pastor at St. Joseph Parish in Needham. We're also joined today, we're very grateful for Reverend David Wright, a native Bostonian and product of its public school system that he's very proud of. Currently serves as executive director of the Black Ministerial Alliance of Greater Boston and as interim executive director of the Boston 10-Point Coalition. He and his family attend People's Baptist Church in the South End, where he has the privilege of serving as assistant pastor. And he's a graduate of Harvard University and Harvard Law School. So, Reverend David, thank you for being with us. We're also joined by Reverend Burns Stanfield, president of the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, GBIO. Also has been pastor of Fourth Presbyterian Church in South Boston for the past 20 years. Reverend Stanfield teaches at Harvard Divinity School and Andover Newton Theological Seminary, has spoken, performed, and taught at many conferences throughout the country. He's also a musician, so as a fellow musician, I really appreciate that. Perhaps we'll have a moment of song as we conclude this morning, a song for peace. Also president of both South Boston Neighborhood Development Corporation and the Vinton Street Hope Initiative. He's active in many of the South Boston neighborhood groups. He and his wife live with their 3 children in Milton, and I hear they're all musicians, so that's also a good sign. So thank you, Reverend Stanfield, for being with us. We're also joined by Sister Maureen Clark, Sister of St. Joseph, originally from Pittsburgh, Mass. Worked in corrections system for 13 years in Pittsburgh before coming here to Massachusetts, where she served in prison ministries for the last 26 years. I know for many of the deacons here, many of you maybe have had interactions with Sister Maureen. She is a fixture in prison ministry, and we're very delighted to have her here with us. She's been working mostly with female offender population, and a highlight of her ministry has been in the creation of programs that help reconcile and reunify women with their children and with their families. recently received an honorary Doctor of Law degree from Fairfield University in recognition of the amazing work she's done over the years. And last but absolutely not least, we have Father Sean Connor. So he has worked as a delegate for Cardinal Sean, working with victims and families of sexual abuse in these past many years. Currently administrator of Sacred Heart Parish in Weymouth Landing and St. Thomas More Parish in Braintree. Also serves as Catholic chaplain to the Boston Police Department. And Father Sean was ordained in 2004, and before entering the priesthood, he worked as a patrolman in the Marshfield Police Department. So rumor has it that he was mentored and almost thrown out of the system by Sister Maureen when he showed up to do some prison ministry work. Father Sean was a chaplain responder to the Marathon bombing and priest, as many of you probably know, to the Martin Richard family as a result of that tragedy. So with those introductions in hand, I'm now going to ask each of our panelists to say a few words towards that issue of experiences around the issues of violence, approaches to outreach to help address that, in ways that we might interact together to look towards the sources and roots of this problem, and also to engage our communities to be advocates in this work. So I'm going to start with Dr. Vito. Vito. Do you want me to come up? You can sit right there. There's a... Is it easier for people to see if I can? Well, maybe. Do you want to do that? Sure.
Thanks, Deacon. Privileged to be here with you, privileged to address you. It's also an honor for me to have served here at the Archdiocese of Boston since 1989, which is about the same year that Burns Stanfield and I met on the South Boston Clergy Association while I was doing some volunteer work there. Our work as an archdiocese around interreligious cooperation against violence stems straight out of our fidelity to the gospel, to the Lord, to our church. Comes right out of our fidelity to the magisterium, to our belonging, to our communion with each other, to our communion with the whole body of Christian believers in all of space and time. In 1989, when I came on board, we already had a trialogue, a Muslim-Jewish Catholic trialogue going on at Boston College. And for years before that, all the way back to Vatican II. And since that time, there have been multiple programs. I can't even tell you how much fruit has been born in each of those relationships. In the Jewish one, we've launched not just dialogues, but education programs through all our schools that have to do with overcoming hate crimes, and violence. And not only that, but our standing dialogue with the Muslim community, which we co-founded in 1999, just in the run-up to the millennium, was absolutely critical because it put in place the long-term trust and relationships that made it possible when the Twin Towers fell for Cardinal Law at that time to call my office and said, everybody on the lawn tomorrow, I want a standing, no daylight between all the religious leaders, stance together against backlash. There will be no backlash in this town. And the interreligious cooperation against that kind of violence at a moment when really our culture was in turmoil came out of the founded relationships that had been built before. It's too late when the Twin Towers have fallen to call everybody and say, I'd like to start to build a trust relationship with you so that we can stand together against violence. You have to start now. And that's true of every level. It's been true on the parish level. It's been true in the neighborhoods. It's been true on the archdiocesan level, nationally, universally. And the fruit has continued. When gambling became an ongoing, recurrent issue that just keeps coming in waves, it was the long-standing relationships that we had built with GBIO, the Black Ministerial Alliance, the 10-Point Coalition, the Massachusetts Council of Churches, the Emmanuel Gospel Center, that enabled us to beat back, and still are. And there are new ministries coming up that we see, the Institute for Christian Unity, Unite Boston, Emmanuel Gospel Center with its host of new ministries, the Starlight Homeless Outreach, and the anti-slavery anti-human trafficking network. As the new ones come up, it becomes our responsibility as veterans to support them, to nourish them, and also to leverage them through our relationships with, for example, the Greek Orthodox metropolis, which hosted our anti-physician assisted suicide campaign. It's only because of the long-term trust and the established personal relationships, which is my message partly to all of us this morning. All politics is local. All anti-violence is personal. Your relationships of trust that you build in your personal networks are the basis on which you're able to work against violence with others, especially in the realm of interreligious cooperation, where you're crossing lines that have been in place since before all of us were born. I could go on with examples. I'm sure some of that will come up. I would point our attention, since Deacon Dan raised the issue, to the roots of violence and to the subtle forms of violence in our society. There's been a lot of thinking done in the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization and in many of our other circles about poverty as violence, about societal structures as violence, about disconnection and alienation in our society. As someone whose PhD is in history, I can tell you that I don't know of any culture ever in human existence where people have been more disconnected from each other, from the earth, and from their God. We've all got screens in the way anyway. And as my favorite 10-year-old once told me, the more disconnected we become, the more we think we are owners instead of stewards. So I think I'm gonna close with a quote from Pope Francis that has really been the basis for our interfaith outreach against violence in the Office for Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs here at the Roman Catholic Archdiocese. This is from The Joy of the Gospel. Pope Francis says, interreligious dialogue is a necessary condition for peace. And therefore, it is a duty for Christians as well as for other religious communities. I don't think it gets simpler than that. It's really, I want to express the honor it is to be here with you, with the clergy and the faithful and the people who have been making a difference since long before I was here. Recently I was talking to someone who said, the police commissioner, Evans, couldn't imagine what Dorchester would be like without priests like Doc Conway and Father Jack Ahern on the street, and Father Jerry Ostermann, whose work goes way back and who I revere. It's my honor to serve you and to serve alongside you.
Thank you, Vito. And I was going to turn to Reverend David. You can do it right from your seat if you'd like. Just make sure that's a live mic, I hope.
Hear me? Oh.
Yep. There you go.
Sorry about that. My deepest apologies. Can everyone see me? Would it be helpful if I stood? Whatever works for people. Okay. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. I count it a privilege to be here with you today. Again, my name is David Wright, and I'm representing both the Black Ministerial Alliance of Greater Boston and the Boston 10-Point Coalition. Our work around, especially violence, has been governed by one watchword, which is collaboration. And in fact, the reason why I'm here as representing both organizations is that 10-Point and the BMA are looking at ways that we can work more closely together to align what we do so that we can be more effective. And that phrase, collaboration, extends just beyond the Black community and Black faith-based organizations, but it extends to our partnerships with many organizations throughout Boston, including Catholic Charities, the Archdiocese, and our long-standing relationship with St. Peter's over in Dorchester. What I want to talk about, and we do a lot of things as most of you do in your work against violence and for social justice, and especially the panelists up here. We probably are wearing more hats than some of us remember. But I just want to focus on a couple of initiatives that we're working on, because I promised the deacon that I would be no more than 5 minutes, and I gave him permission to kick me when I got past 4 minutes, 30 seconds. So one of the things that we have developed is this concept called teen cafes. And we didn't create it. We actually borrowed it from one of the churches in our area, Greater Love Tabernacle. They were doing these things called teen cafes. They were running youth programming out of the church on Friday and Saturday nights. And for the early part of the 2000s, right around 2003, 2004, the worst kept secret in Boston was that the hot spot for young teens who didn't have any place to go was a church. And they would go there, and they would have spoken word, they would have arts programs, they had a whole bunch of things going on. And literally the police, when they saw kids congregating, probably about to get into trouble or be the victims of violence, they would say, "We don't want you on this corner anymore. There's something going on at that church. If we come by and you're not there, you're going to be in trouble." And so we looked at this concept and realized that if we could replicate this, if we could do this more, we could attract and engage more young people. So we got some federal dollars, we raised some private dollars, and we've been running these teen cafes since about 2005, I think, with support from, again, local foundations, local corporations, and things like that. And again, our watchword is collaboration. So we work with community-based organizations, we work with churches, we work with parachurch ministries, anybody who will willingly engage with youth. That's who we want to work with. And we try to develop things for youth to do every Friday and Saturday night, especially through the summer, because that's, of course, the high time of violence, right, when they have most time on their hand. I will tell you, it has not been as successful as we would have liked. Where we are falling down most is in our engagement with churches, because while on Friday nights they're more than willing to help because they have to get up and be in church on Sunday morning, we always have this huge hole on Saturday night. So I put that out there as something that perhaps we can discuss later on. The other thing I wanted to mention was using that model of collaboration in teen cafes. We piloted something this summer that turned out to be a greater success than we thought. Going into the summer, we had gotten, looking at the trend information through the BRIC, the police department's intelligence system, we were looking at a summer of really high violence in the housing cooperatives known as Warren Gardens and St. Joseph's. And there were 5 co-ops, Warren Gardens, St. Joseph's, Charlene 1 and 2, and Marksdale, and they're all connected, some of them the same families, they've been around forever, but there's this violent war that's been going on for generations at this point. So we wanted to get ahead of it. We focused a lot of attention in that area. We partnered with Rocks Presbyterian, 12th Baptist, Elliott Congregational. We supplied money so that the kids in that neighborhood who wanted to could go to, Elliott had developed a summer program they called the Butterfly Project, where they would take kids and they would engage them in choral singing, drums, and of all things, violin. 12th Baptist, we did a partnership with them. They got a grant to do summer, they do a summer program, a really good summer program, and so they got slots to bring kids in for their program. And Rocks Pres, working in conjunction with Trinity Boston, they did teen cafes on, I think they did theirs on Friday nights, and then they had a Saturday program. So by focusing all of these energies in this one area, we only ended up with 1 shooting this summer. Now, of course, we can't take credit for all of that. We don't even proclaim to, but we are grateful to God that He allowed us to work together to be of some support and some assistance to the family and youth of that community so that it was a reduction in violence. We have to give God credit for making that happen because, again, going into the summer, we saw nothing but blood running through that city, running through that area. So those are the things that we're doing, and we're thinking if we could replicate that model, if we could develop partnerships of faith-based and community-based organizations focused on specific geographic areas, especially the hotspots, we could probably more effectively not just tamp down, but redirect the youth and families away from violence in an effort to, let me back up because I forgot something, and I'll say this very quickly because I think I'm running out of time. Part of the process is not just giving youth and families something to do. It's providing a safe place where they can engage with caring adults. We all know that the #1 factor in moving people from wherever they are to wherever they ought to be is the presence of a caring adult in their lives. So what we really are trying to do is prepare a space where caring adults can engage with young people. And for my personal mission, my hope and prayer is that the caring adults who engage with these young people and with their families will lead them to Christ, right? Because it doesn't matter if we feed everybody, clothe everybody, if they go to an eternity without God, that's not a win for us. And so we're looking for people that we can partner with, not on our federal dollars, not on our private dollars, but on our unrestricted dollars that we raise from our own congregations, to be present at these cafes to see how we can connect with these youth, build relationships with them, and lead them to Christ. So I'm going to end there. I think I'm just under time. Am I good?
I think you did very well.
Thank you very much.
Reverend Burns.
I need to press the button. I press the mute button, maybe?
Maybe.
I'll do that then. Great. Hi, everybody. Again, my name is Burns Stanfield, and I'm pastor at Fourth Presbyterian Church in South Boston, Andrew Square area, close to Old Colony projects, Mary Ellen McCormick projects. A neighborhood that's changed a lot in the 20-some years that I've been there since Vito and I met. We have not, I think all of our towns and neighborhoods are affected in some way by violence. There are some that have had a horrifically disproportionate hit from that. We have not had it as bad as many, but it's been there. We too run a summer program. We call it Summer Meals Program. It wasn't real original. We were mainly just trying to feed kids 20 years ago. And it's grown to a program, over 100 kids a day, mainly from the projects and other parts of town. Arts programming in between. It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing. But we don't have enough room in our building. So for recreation, we go down the street to the park. Day Boulevard, right there. And we go to that park, and there was a time 2 summers ago, and it was fortunately not the youngest kids in the class, in the program, was the older kids, kind of 10 to 13. And they all had to hit the deck because there was a shootout across the street between an officer and a suspect, I guess I should say. So down the ground they went, and then they came back up, and the kids, some were, they were all scared. Some were not unfamiliar with gunshots, I have to say. Sad to say. But they locked down the church. And, you know, they're just all too young to be exposed to that. That's just wrong, right? So it touches our neighborhood, as it has touched many neighborhoods. What our parish does are a number of things that I suspect other organizations and parishes do. We try to address, what do they call, prevention, primary prevention. This is one level of response. I think prayer is part of that. I think worship is part of that. I think Sunday school is part of that. We also do programs. We try to feed people. We run the 6-week camp. We don't call it Teen Cafe, but we have 3 nights a week when we just create a safe space for teenagers, mainly from the projects to come. We also teach teenagers organizing and civic engagement skills. They're out going door to door right now, encouraging our neighborhood to vote, because we know politicians pay more attention to our neighborhood if our voting is going up. We just know that. So last year, by the way, they were very successful, and Mayor Walsh came to the church to congratulate them, which was just a nice moment. Anyway, we do a lot of that kind of stuff, and I bet you do too, and it's great. However, what I really want to direct your attention to today, in my remaining, whatever it is, few minutes, is working together, powerfully working together. Powerful. There you go. All right. But it chose a really nice moment to feedback, so that was good. I'm president of the Greater Boston Interfaith Organization, and I've been involved for some 15 years, since the beginning, a little more than 15. And I understand Father Jerry gave us a nice shout out. The Catholic parishes have been very important in our history. And I want to just paint a little picture for you, okay? There are many, many causes and many, many responses to violence. one piece is the availability of guns. They're too available, all right? Now, right now, nationally, just being realistic, we're not going to get good legislation there. It ain't going to happen right now. Massachusetts, we had a pretty good bill that got passed this summer. We were very, very involved in that. Even so, guns come from New Hampshire, guns come from Virginia, they come from other places. So we, in our organization, are thinking, there's another way to tackle this that we want to explore, and that is paying attention to the manufacturers. And we're doing this in collaboration with groups like GBIO in 60 other cities across the country. We're a part of a network called the Industrial Areas Foundation, Saul Alinsky, working closely with Catholic parishes in Chicago. And what we've begun to talk to manufacturers, but they really don't want to pay much attention to us, right? Because what they really are concerned about is profits. However, we've done some research. It turns out that of the guns purchased in the United States, 40% are purchased by elected officials or governments, police departments, states, municipalities. It makes sense, right? So we are now going to municipalities and public officials and saying, can we get ourselves organized? We're not going to get anything from D.C., but let's use the marketplace. Let's get organized. And eventually, such that we could go to manufacturers and mayors or governors could say, we'll buy our guns from you, but only if you're doing this, this, and this. And there are things you can do with smart technology. There are things you can do with tracking bullets. There's a lot of stuff. And believe me, the police chiefs would love this. So, for example, you can have the kind of technology in my cell phone, that button that recognizes my fingerprint. You can use that so only authorized purchasers can use a gun. And I was talking to a police captain a few months ago. He totally adores this idea, if only for this reason, that when a perpetrator and an officer are wrestling and the perpetrator gets the officer's gun, he can't use it on the officer, right? This guy and many other police chiefs are all aboard. So what we are organizing to do right now across the country is to look for public officials who will sign on only for a request for information. We're not boycotting yet. We're only saying, will you sign this and ask the manufacturers just to answer a few questions, kind of setting the path, all right? Now, here's the picture I want to paint for you. Oh, one more fact. Right now, we've got about 40 to 50 officials who have already signed on, including the mayor of Atlanta, including the mayor of Sacramento, who is president of the U.S. Mayors Association, including the governor of Connecticut, and we're this close to getting the governor of Illinois. So we're making headway, okay? Tomorrow, GBIO, 200 leaders from GBIO will be in my church in South Boston. We'll have Martha Coakley and Charlie Baker with us. And we're going to ask them, will you sign on to this? Now, we're not sure if we're going to get what we're going to get. Well, one may say yes, we think. One may say, that sounds like a good idea, but I need to talk to you more about it, which is okay, right? That's what we can do when we have 200 people. That'll fill my place. But in April, in the middle of April, our leaders are going to go bring more people. And I hope this interests you, because I would love to have your parishes involved, to get organized, to build relationships, to develop leaders. And we're hoping that in the middle of April, we'll have not 200 people, but 1,500 or 1,800 or maybe even 2,000 people gathered. And we will have whichever candidate wins, whoever it is, and Mayor Walsh, who's this close to signing, and other officials. And there, in front of 200 people, we're going to say, now, would you please sign this thing? Okay? Now, you see, I can't do that in my church alone. If I get all the Presbyterians, all the tons of Presbyterians in New England, we're not going to get anywhere. If I get all the Protestants, I don't think we're going to get there. If I get you guys, we're getting closer. But now imagine when we're gathered with the Islamic Society of Boston and the Boston's Jewish community, which is very much involved, and the Protestants, and the Catholics, and others. See, they have to pay attention to that. None of us can do this alone. We have to organize to be together. So that's only one angle at reducing violence, but it can work. So prayerfully consider joining us.
Thank you, friends.
Can I give one line?
Absolutely.
The name of that campaign is Do Not Stand Idly By, which comes from Leviticus 19. Do not stand idly by when your neighbor's blood is being shed. Wow.
And now we'll hear from Sister Maureen.
Did you notice they're all tall and they're wondering whether they could be seen? Well, I'm looking to see who's tall, who's short in this group here. Anyhow, thank you so much for inviting me to be here and to share some words with you. I'm going to be very, very local to women in prison. If you want to find out about the men in prison, you can go on the DOC website and find everything you want. But let me just specifically talk about women in prison and violence, specifically. You know, this morning, listening to Father Hare, I was really touched by all of what he had to say. And he reminded me of Father James Martin, Jesuit priest, read the Joy of the Gospel, and he said that he thought the Pope was challenging himself and us with three questions, which would be, why not look at things from a new perspective? Why not be open to doing things in a new way? And why not have a vision for the church? And I felt like Father Brian was, in many ways, under that same umbrella. So why not look at things from a new perspective? I work at Framingham, MCI Framingham, and I work at South Middlesex. They are two prisons that are on the same ground. The MCI Framingham is a medium facility, meaning from maximum, if you have a maximum facility, that means you have somebody in a watchtower and the razor wires. A medium facility means you have the razor wires, but you don't have any watchtower. So Framingham is the medium facility with all the razor wires, and on that same ground is South Middlesex, right at the end of the parking lot. And South Middlesex is a minimum pre-release facility for women. So at this point, we house close to 800 women between the two facilities. I speak to you specifically about this facility because it is the only women's facility in the state of Massachusetts for people who are serving long sentences. We do have people waiting trial. But recently, I don't know if you read in the paper, Chicopee came and took 70 of our women who were awaiting trial to the new facility they created, which is wonderful. Last Monday, I was sitting in my office at 8:15 a.m. listening in the middle of a code that we were cutting someone down. I would like to say that kind of suicide attempts and suicide happens rarely, but it does not. It happens all the time. Because the women I work with and the women in prison have such low self-esteem and have such little hope. So believe me when I tell you, it's a real issue. With women, at least with women in prison, women turn things in on themselves. The way they relate, they turn it in. If you hurt me, I may not say anything, but I've internalized it. Where, no offense, you guys, but a lot of the guys just lash back out. And so I think that's one major reason why things are so difficult with the women. The statistics tell us that 85% have been abused children. These children did not go to Father Paul's school in Lawrenceville. And I work with women who have never received help as a child. when they were beaten, they were sexually molested, they were raped, they were drugged, they were not parented. They did not have the ability to help themselves. They were only children. That's what happens to the children we don't help that have been abused. You see them later. In facilities, we don't want to see them. I remember one woman saying to me recently, when I was walking through her life with her, that she thought her job at 7 years old was to entertain her mother at 4 o'clock when she came home from work. She would try to get her to sit down and play cards with her, because if she did that, she thought maybe when her dad came home, the two of them would not drink. And they drank every night. 8 o'clock, they were unconscious on the floor. But first, they beat each other up. Now, this woman has been she's done 20-some years at MCI Framingham. And that's what she grew up with. No parenting at all. You know, and you can say, well, maybe that story was fabricated. But it wasn't fabricated. Her brother and her sister both wrote letters to the court on her behalf, explaining that their childhood was just that. So what crimes are we looking at for women that do come in after this violence? It's more around drugs, and it's more around property offenses. What we try to do as church, we try to bring hope and purpose and direction. There's 2 wonderful books that you might want to look at. One is called Interrupted Life by Ricky Solinger, where women tell their own stories of their lives in prison. The book is a gripping collection of writings about imprisoned women in the United States. Our country jails a larger percentage in its population than any other country in the nation. This opening work brings together scores of voices from both inside and outside the prison system, including incarcerated and those previously incarcerated. It's a book well worth your effort. Why not look at things from another perspective, to go beyond our comfort zone and to see out of eyes that are not judgmental? Another reference that helps us look at that is a book called Couldn't Keep It to Myself by Wally Lamb. You hear again from incarcerated women in their own words how they were imprisoned by abuse, rejection, drug, alcohol addiction, by their own destructive impulses long before ever entering the criminal justice system. This is a challenge for us today. Is there any way that we can help? We can help this situation. I think we all know the prison system does not work. I was at a parish, I guess it was 22 years ago. It was actually Sacred Heart, and gave a talk about prison ministry. And after the talk, a gentleman came up to me and he said, I think I'd like to volunteer. So we talked a little bit, and he said in that conversation that he's a judge. So I said, "Ooh, how's that going to work?" And he said, "Sister Maureen, when we read together tonight the passage from Matthew 25, visiting the imprisoned," he said, "I consider that an injunction from God." And he said, "I know a lot about injunctions. And if God's going to give me an injunction, I'm going to pay attention." He said, and besides, when I read it again in my Bible tonight when you were reading, he said, there was no paragraph after that or little indent that said, unless you're a judge. So he has been coming, and still does, for 20-some years. He tells me that it helps him to see if seeing people in prison, he knows sometimes there's a nadir in people's lives where they need help, and they need to step back. But he wants to see if, in fact, they are getting the help that they need. Okay, one more second. So the programs, I don't know if we're going to do this later, but some of the programs that we're really proud of that we try to do at Framingham is an aftercare program where I could always really use your help. we do basic programs. We do a Fully Alive program where people from the outside come in every Tuesday night and talk of any topic that makes you more fully alive. We try to address that sense and that need for hope in people's lives. We have a Read to Me Mommy program where we try to keep the women connected to their children. They read a book to their child on a DVD, and we send the book and the DVD home for the children. We do all kind of spiritual programs, spiritual direction. But the aftercare program, a woman 6 months to a year before she leaves, we try to connect her up to someone in the community that is willing to be her friend. If you volunteer inside, you're not allowed to be a friend. We run this program, we meet every month with the visitors, we call them aftercare visitors. Every month we do education with them, we have dinner with them. We talk about how it's going with the people they're working with. We don't give home addresses, we don't give home phone numbers, we use cell phones, and it's worked out very well. So we have hundreds at this point in that program out and doing well. So you're more than welcome to help us.
Thank you, Sister. And now Father Sean.
And it's a great program. When I met Sister Maureen my first year at the seminary, after I quit my job because I got sick of working, Sister Maureen did reject me. She took the other students, said, I don't think he'll fit in. But we've been dear friends ever since. You should not only consider helping, but do it. She's invited you. Some people can't go to prison. I kind of grew up in prison. I hope my mother's not watching this. But you can do something for people on the other side, just like you've heard many times today, that there's things you can do for another parish, another community. You can do for people of different faith and people that you might never meet. Just those little things do help. I've been reflecting a little bit since I found out that they must have run down the list really far to ask me to come here today. Just thinking about the last few years in light of the people I've met along the way and what worked well after the marathon bombing and what it pointed out that should be different. And I think the biggest thing is really relationships and family. I actually did grow up. My oldest brother has spent over 30 years back and forth to prison and still gets arrested all the time. But I grew up in a system where I was taught, especially by our dad, that your brother's in prison because he did something wrong. He's still my son. He's still your brother. I love him the same as I love you. So being a little kid, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, and going to visit, it formed me differently to look at my brother as my brother. I knew why he wasn't wearing regular clothes like everyone else, but I also found out that the people in prison were someone else's kid and brother and sister. They had a story too. I was thinking about, and I joke about this because it's a good Irish thing. It gets you through life. That the people of St. Anne's and Dorchester really didn't like me until I got transferred. And then they said I was the best thing that had ever come their way, which is true. We all make mistakes. We all do things that people don't like. We all try things that fail. We all have great ideas that never flourish because no one comes together with it. That particular day, we were packing up my mother's house because she had moved to a nursing home. And when the phone call came from the police dispatch to explain what was happening, which none of us knew, they said, how quickly can you get here? When I arrived, I did what I was trained to do, things that I had done before as a police officer, things I had done in human services, things I had done and learned in the seminary, things that I had done and learned as a priest. I jumped into a particular mode of just trying to help people, to be there with them, to love them, to bring the gospel to them. in a very particularly unique, horrifying situation of violence and hatred and terror. But it was the relationships that had been built along the way. The other people I knew, some of the different ministers from Boston who were there responding, the police officers, firefighters, emergency medical people, nurses and doctors. I knew people in the crowd. Just like looking out here, I recognized people from different places. And we all worked well together because we had a common mission, a common vision, and a common need to respond to something that was bad. It wasn't until hours later, much into the evening, that a parishioner, a nurse at the hospital, called to say, here are the dead, and one of them is someone near and dear to you. I learned something else at that moment, that we're often powerless to things that we want to change and things that we want to make happen. We can work, as you've heard great examples of, to change laws and to make things right. They often take time and they're often not perfect. But you can't change bad things from happening. You can love, but we know the darkness is still there, and we know suffering will always be there. It's deflating, but it's also freeing. I was thinking about a great mom and a great advocate in Dorchester, Roxbury, Azira Mendez, who began many years ago. I met her while in the seminary. Walks for Peace from a mother's perspective. Many of these moms have lost more than one child, nephew, nieces, neighbors, and friends, and they still walk. They still walk for peace, and they bring others together. And the year after, I've learned something else, that we must do more. You hear it from an intellectual perspective, a spiritual perspective, and a human perspective, that we must work together more. We're God's children. We're supposed to act like it. We're supposed to seek out, and we're supposed to love. And that's really what will change everything.
I want to thank each of you for your words, and I want to really open this up to the community. Some of the words that really just keep resonating here is this issue of relationship, this issue of family, and this issue of hope. And what came back into my mind from Father Brian's talk this morning was that true Christian hope generates history. Do you remember he said that? Hope generates history. It's from the hope that things can happen, that have an impact, that can start to sow seeds. And it comes out of relationship, right? That when we see violence, to see that these are our brothers and sisters, those who are affected, those who are harmed, but also those who are causing it. And so I just thought I would open that up to the floor and also to the people on our panel of how do we get connected? How do we start to see with new eyes, as Sister Maureen said, that these are our brothers and sisters, and we cannot sit on the sidelines idly by, as Reverend Burns told us, right? When blood is flowing in the street from our brothers and sisters. Now, all of us can react when it's someone that's very close and dear to us, but we need to react for all that's happening in our communities. So I just open that up. We need to connect within our parishes, and we need to connect across parishes into our other brother and sister churches. So I have a microphone, and I can walk among you.
Thank you. My name is Elcio Santos. I'm from the St. Arcesius Parish in Framingham. Many of you maybe don't know me, but I work as a surgical technologist at Mount Auburn Hospital. I was in the operating room when the MIT officer came in, and we struggled throughout the night, delivering blood and scrubbing his operation. But speaking about violence, I'm particularly worried about our kids and our family. I'm from the Brazilian community, and we have a very large community throughout the Archdiocese of Boston, and we try to build this bridge between the cultures, American and Brazilian. And I'm concerned also, as our first plenaria here, talk about this bridge between what we do with our kids. And it's very important for us to realize this going and help in terms of violence, because we never know what's going to happen in the future. So I think it's very important for us to realize that when we go to help somebody, it could be, our neighbors, it could be somebody who's having a fight in their house, and we just have to be open that we never know how God's going to use us to help them.
Thank you, Elcio.
I just want to say, my son was in a gang for 4 years. The gang members, the parents put them out because they brought violence to their house. Being faithful and a Catholic and caring, I accepted some of these kids in my house. I let them all live in my house. On Sunday, I would get them up. They laid on the floor wherever there was space. On Sunday, I would get them up. I'd bring them to church. However, they would come to church and sleep in the back on the pew. When I got ready to go, I'd go wake them up. Come on, let's go. But I do want to say, out of the 6 members, my son was in a gang. He's still living. Out of the 6 members, I was able to save 4 of them. And I'm blessed. My son is also safe, too, although he's in hiding. God gave me the strength to pull these kids together to make sure if their parents didn't care, I cared. And if they was in church, the people who was there, they cared. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. I think it ties back into what you were saying, David, right? The kids need to engage with caring adults, right? It takes a village to raise children. We cannot abandon one another.
Hi. I think you mentioned, you used the phrase, those who are causing it. And that's a very deep statement, those who are causing it. And I would like to say that I think that, number one, we should pray. We should get direction and wisdom from the Holy Spirit. And then we should move within our parishes and so forth, because who's causing it? Is it the 12-year-old kid who has a gun? Well, how does he know, and where can he get a gun from? So the kid that pulled the trigger may be the cause, but there's a deeper cause. And I think we need to be conscious about that. And so as we try to help others and help ourselves, look into and pray about the deepness of this thing. And let's all do this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just received word that we need to finish a little bit earlier than anticipated, as the Cardinal is waiting for us downstairs. He's a very patient man, however, so I don't have any worries about that. We heard a few comments. I just wanted to open it to the panel if there were any thoughts that anyone would like to close with in terms of this issue of outreach in families, in close-by neighborhoods, and in ways to bridge and build this engaging connection.
Again, we don't presume to have the successful model. What we have done has proven useful in our communities. If anybody's interested in learning how we do what we do, or if anyone's interested in partnering with us in what we do, we would love to have that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and we'll please have much outreach in that direction, as well as with Burns in the South End, who also has given an invitation to us. So let us not sit idly by. We cannot sit idly by. And it's not just the pastors, it's not just deacons, it's not just the leadership, it's everybody. And so as you go back to your parishes, can we try to engage the community to do small things? Because, you know, if we can do small things, big things can happen. Because true Christian hope will generate history. So I want to thank our panelists, if we could have a round of applause for them. And I just was reminded that we have some paperwork that needs to be taken care of.
Great. Thank you, Deacon Dan. Valuation forms on your chair. Please fill them out, but please go directly now to Mass in Bethany Chapel on the first floor. Thank you all. You will be hearing soon from us for the 7th annual Archdiocese Conference. Thank you. We'll be collecting the forms at the door of the chapel.
So who's got the video? I mean, where's the DVD?
Sharon has it.
Okay. Maybe I'll go get it.
Heard that he
Yeah.